All right, guys. This is a two-pronged attack on getting ready for the vocabulary exam. We're reviewing in class, but I would like to let you have something that you can look at home. So I want to read the definition, and then I want you to look at what you need to be ready for when it comes to the Q&A in the matching portion of the exam. So government. The book says the institutions and processes through which public goods are made for a society. And simply, a government can be a variety of things and have a variety of institutions. Ours happens to have an executive, legislative, judicial branch, and a large bureaucracy. In Britain, it's a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy without any power, a parliament, the bureaucracy. In France, it's the same way, without a king or queen. But but any of those institutions are the ones that make policies that the governments follow, and people either endorse or they get rid of those policies by electing new governments. Now, public goods is pretty easy. It's goods such as clean air and clean water that everyone must share. Anything that is a shared resource um, is one in which the government has a hand in making sure that it's in its most pristine state. So therefore, we have clean water regulations, we have clean air regulations. You could be asked a question that is related to the to the way that we handle our natural resources. Um, Next, we have politics. And politics simply says in the book the process by which we select our government leaders and what policies these leaders pursue. Politics produces authoritative decisions about public issues. Really. Um, I guess that's kind of a pristine point of view, but politics is a dirty game. It is the fight between two parties because we have simply a two-party system. Other nations have more parties in their system, but we have a two-party system. And what these two parties do is fight over the issues that they feel are important and how they're going to handle these issues. And many times it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two parties, it's feudal-D and feudal-Dung. But right now we have a fairly wide gap between what the two parties stand for, with the Democrats moving more and more to the left, and the Republicans kind of have moved to the right and are kind of stationary at this point. But either party is going to produce the type of legislation that leads to decisions that satisfy the voters that voted for them in the first place. Political participation is the fourth word, and that's all the activities used by citizens to influence the selection of political leaders or the policies they pursue. Voting is the most common but not the only means of political participation in a democracy. Other means include protest and civil disobedience. Certainly, if we were to look at a number of things that have gone on in 2014, including the things that have gone on in Missouri and other places, that is a form of protest and civil disobedience. There have been protests both for and against the Israelis and the Palestinians and so on and so forth. That is a civil liberty that you have. You have an ability to express your displeasure or your pleasure with government policies. But voting is the most common way that we participate in the system. It's voting at the local level, it's voting at the state level, it's voting at the federal level. We vote in the largest numbers at the federal level, we vote in the smallest numbers at the state level. The next word would be single issue groups. And single issue groups are groups that have very narrow interests. And they are also the reason that we have a bad case of hyperpluralism. Single issue groups do not want to compromise on the issue that they are involved in any way, because that would, from their perspective, show a great deal of weakness. So if you look at if you look at single issue groups, abortion, gay rights, gosh, you could go down the list, but there are any number of issues that attract people who are only interested in that issue, and everything else falls by the wayside. And again, remember, these are different from traditional interest groups. Traditional interest groups like AARP, the Sierra Club, have a variety of issues that they're interested in. Single issue groups, one thing, and a lack of willingness to compromise. The next word would be policymaking system. And in a policymaking system, the process by which policy comes into being and evolves over time, people's interests, problems, and concerns create political issues for government policymakers. These issues shape policy, which in turn impacts people, generating more interest, problems, and concerns. So let's look at how this works out. After 9/11, people were terrified that there would be another terrorist attack. Therefore, we did a number of things. We passed a number of wide-ranging bills that certainly infringed upon our personal liberties, which meant the government could spy on us easier. We went into Afghanistan and we went into Iraq. All these became the policies of the Bush administration. And now we see, as the circle completes itself, we see how those issues now come back around and affect people. Most of us don't like the fact that the government spies on us. Therefore, we want the government policy to change. And so we've moved away from being fearful of terrorists now to being fearful of what the government knows about us. And so a policymaking system is just all the steps that come about when you start with an issue and then you want to resolve that issue. And it has to go from the people through the linkage institutions to the government to the bureaucracy which carries out, and then the new policy is in place. And that leads to linkage institutions, the political channels through which people's concerns become political issues on the policy agenda. In the United States, linkage institutions include elections, political parties, interest groups, and all media. And you have to know what linkage institutions are. Don't get them confused with anything else. When we talk about political parties, we're not talking about Democrats and Republicans, but we're talking about political parties being the vehicle. In a sense, we are talking about Democrats and Republicans, but we're also talking about political parties being the vehicle between voter interest and resolving an issue at the federal level, or at the state level, or even the local level. Media illuminates the problems or the interests that people have, and then carries those interests to the government. Interest groups do the same thing. Elections are very definitive. There's not that many elections a year, whereas you're dealing perhaps with interest groups and media and all of that 365 days a year. You're dealing with elections far fewer times. Not that you're not involved in them, but you only vote a couple times a year. And the elections can change the people who run the policymaking systems, especially if there's a change in the executive branch, or there's a change in one of the houses of Congress. Now, breaking that down, the policy agenda is pretty easy to discern. The issues that attract the serious attention of public officials or other people actually involved in politics at any given point in time. So right now there's Afghanistan, there's ISIS, there is immigration. There's any number of things that are on the policy agenda, and government is struggling to figure out what is the best approach to providing a remedy for what the people think. But of course, what's weird about policy agenda is sometimes there's a disconnect between the executive branch and the people. So, for instance, we especially see that with immigration, where consistently, when you look at Pew and other polls, people want the border secure first before we do any sort of reform. And it seems as if the party in power wants to do it the other way. And the other party says, well, no, we won't do it because we don't trust you, and therefore, then nothing gets done. And that's kind of what the policy agenda sometimes fails. And in the immigration space, it's failed. In other places, the effort by the administration to get the Affordable Care Act passed worked. Now it may be imploding, and now the policy agenda may be: do we save it or do we gut it, or do we get rid of it and start again? We don't know. But policy agendas are really fluid, and they change all the time. A political issue is an issue that arises when people disagree about a problem and how to live it. Immigration, terrorism, pot, legalization of marijuana, gay marriage. Those are at least 4 things that are political issues. Then we have the policy-making institutions, the branches of government charged with taking action on political issues. This is the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the courts. So the House and the Senate, the presidency, and the courts. But we have to add a 4th one, because if you look at an institution like the IRS has an enormous amount of power. It is judge, jury, and executioner. So it may deem that you, as a taxpayer, didn't pay enough. Where do you have recourse? You don't. The IRS has said, you owe us money. When you go to battle the IRS, you're in an IRS court. The IRS hears the facts and then makes the decision. Judge, jury, executioner. So the bureaucracy has become that 4th policy-making institution. Here's the problem. They are the unelected. They're the unelected. Who gave them the power to do that? Well, apparently our dysfunctional institutions have. And if you wonder why I've kind of become a libertarian, that is the major reason. I am very fearful of the bureaucracy. And public policy. Public policy is a choice the government makes in response to a political issue. So a policy is a course of action taken with regard to some problems. So President Obama, when he came in, he said, I want to close out our foray into Iraq. So it has become public policy over the last 4 years to draw down the number of troops, help establish or stabilize the government in Iraq, and by the end of that time, we will be gone. And he said we will be gone by X date. And so we will. That is an example of a public policy. You can look at a number of public policies, and you can call it that, and you can look at how the issues are resolved, and you can see sometimes they are resolved, sometimes they are not resolved. You can then apply, or look at public policy and hyperpluralism and pluralism and elite class theory, and see how it all works. So this is where I'm going to end this one. This is up to page 13. So I'm ending with public policy, and the second vocabulary lecture will be starting with democracy through the end of the chapter.